part of like any big data bug, I think, is understanding the impact, right? If it's like a really bad bug, you'll want to understand, is it affecting 10 people or is this affecting like millions? Part of, I think, being a good data scientist is building trust, right? Being rigorous, being candid, understanding the data. And if you don't have that trusting relationship in the person, you're less likely to believe what they're telling you, even if it's true.
Alrighty. Hello, Maura.
Hello, Steph.
Hello from Iceland.
And hello from San Francisco.
Okay, you have to tell us what it's like to be back in the office.
Oh, it's so nice. We're just beginning to start. SF has been, a very safe place to be, and 25% office capacity is coming over the next few weeks. So it's very energizing. I'm excited to see more of my teammates.
Nice. I mean, this has been my life also, of course, here in Iceland. Since I was in San Francisco, had a quick 1 or 2 week trip back to Iceland, and then they shut everything down. So I've been in here, and this is the office, and I've been in the office for the last year. It's been a little bit different.
It's awesome.
Yes, but thank you so much, Maura, for joining us again on this Fireside Chat. I know that the podcast sparked a bunch of conversations, and we've been getting great feedback on it. So I'm excited to do some follow-up discussions on some of the topics that we talked about. Maybe to kick things off, just really excited to have you here. For everyone who is tuning in, I've shared this widely on the internet. I think Maura is a rare kind of a data leader who really focuses on collaboration and data empowerment. And I relate really heavily to, I feel like we're soulmates, represented by our matching necklace. I remember when you first got that necklace, Maura. Where did you find it? Where did you end up finding it?
It's a craft store craft hoop. So, the highest quality jewelry.
I love it. And you actually know more about the backstory of your necklace than I do. I just found mine in my mom's basement. So maybe it was a craft ring. Maybe it was a wreath. I don't know. But anyway, so anyone who is tuning in, you can ask questions too. You can feel free to hop into the chat on Twitch or on our Slack channel, or tweet us. We will try to monitor that as well, and share your questions for Maura. So in the Right Track Slack, we are using the channel podcast, #podcast. And if you're not already a part of our Slack community, you can join us on therighttrack.avo.app/Slack, I think. Yes. So Maura, welcome. How are you today?
I'm so great. Yeah, we've there's a lot of exciting stuff going on at Patreon. We're talking a lot about the future of the product and the future of mobile and the future of international. So we had a big all hands this morning, super energized by it. So I'm having a great day.
Awesome. Yeah, I assume you've had some amazing all hands recently with your latest funding announcement of the evaluation of $4 billion. Right?
Yeah, super exciting.
How does that feel? How does it feel to have gone through that journey?
It feels wild. I think what's really exciting is, Patreon was kind of building for the problems that creators have 7-8 years ago. And now it feels like a lot of other companies are waking up to creators as customers. And so it's just exciting. It's really validating to see the world change in that way. And obviously the valuation is part of that, but it's just a tiny part that's enabling us to do more for creators.
Yes, exactly. That's a really good point. Yeah, it was really inspiring to watch Jack's video of when he was talking about the change of the world. It gave me goosebumps. But let's get into it. I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of the topics here. One of my highlights and one of my interests is sort of data team structures. And we talked a little bit about your centralized versus integrated data team and what it means to have a centralized data team versus data practitioners integrated into product teams. And you talked about your hybrid model. I wanted to maybe get you to talk a little bit about what are some of the considerations for some other people who are figuring out what is right for their company.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest considerations is size. Like when your data team, if you have a data team of 1 or a data team of 2, I think your reporting structure, might not matter that much. And if you have a data team of 100 or 200, right, your reporting structure is really going to have an impact on folks' career growth and on collaboration and on the way that data works within the company. So size is definitely a huge consideration. I think another is like the company's ability to understand data science as a discipline. So one of the trade-offs if you have a fully integrated model is, you might have data scientists reporting to product managers or reporting to engineering managers. And it's important that those managers know kind of data science is a separate thing than engineering and then product and then design. And so that's one of the other things to consider is like, do you have managers who will understand what a data scientist is working on, what their growth might look like as a data scientist, versus if you're centralized like we are and you have data scientists reporting to data science managers, they're going to have that context, right? They're going to be able to know what it looks like to be a world-class data scientist. So like management structures, the kind of management context is one of the other key things as well.
Those are really good highlights. So this is a lot from the perspective of the data team. I think it's interesting also to consider it from the perspective of the product organization, because I know there's so much movement in product teams being data driven. And I feel like there's a lot of product teams are calling for, and product leaders are calling for getting an analyst on the team, basically. Mm-hmm. And so I think that probably would typically take into the box of an integrated data team. And I've seen that hire happen before the team, like the total team is 100. And so obviously that's going to happen before the data team is 100 people. So maybe like if people are 50 people or something, what would you say about that?
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about like getting the analyst on the team is that what it can sometimes create, or what I've seen is you'll have some teams with a bunch of analysts and other teams with no analysts, and then like teams will be more data driven than the others. And you'll try to like steal analysts from each other, and you because of different like hiring capabilities, right? Like if you have people that know how to hire analysts on the marketing side of the business, but not within product, you could end up with like different qualities of data skills across the company. So I think that's something to consider, again, is like your hiring capacity too. The thing I like about our hybrid model is, we talked about this a bit in the podcast, but like sometimes if you have a data scientist within a team, you kind of see data as that person's job instead of everyone building some capacity to understand data. And obviously like the data person should be the best at it and be the most fluent and rigorous. But it can sometimes be like, oh, that's that person's job. I don't need to know about experimentation, or I don't need to know about metrics. So that's the nice thing about this hybrid approach is like we can push on product a little bit to be more data oriented. Product can push on us to be more product oriented. And it feels like that healthy balance instead of kind of like, oh, this is the data person's job. They'll own the whole thing.
Yes, I think that is spot on. I think that's one of my most valuable lessons is it's really important for the data folks on the team to sync internally, like whether it's an integrated model where the data person reports to the product manager in the beginning. I think it's really important to have like that leadership and someone setting the direction, company-wide direction, and at least across the product teams also. So I agree.
Yeah, I was one of the things about like if you do have an integrated approach that I've seen successful. There's this great talk at Rev, which is a data science leadership conference a few years ago, about this the federated model, which was like kind of pulled in a Star Trek analogy, which is like even if you have data analysts and data scientists across a bunch of teams, you should have some venue for them to all come together and set standards and processes and norms. So you absolutely can have an integrated model and have it work if you have the right like systems and processes to make sure that your data story across the business and the way you expose data to folks and the way you talk about it is kind of consistent across those teams.
Yes, totally. I agree. Okay, awesome. So to get started with that, let's say you're the first product analyst. I don't know. This is a difficult question, but anything that comes to mind that they should do?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, being the first product analyst is so fun. Like, usually you have a ton of problems to solve. One thing you can do, and we've done this a little bit at Patreon, is like interview teams on how they use data. So let's say you're a product analyst and you like are kind of concerned that the marketing team is using data in a different way, or maybe the finance team is. Like, do a little survey, even better than a survey, because sometimes people hate filling out surveys. Like, just get some one-on-ones with like the marketing manager, one-on-ones with the finance leader, and say like, hey, how do you use data today? What's buggy? How would you like to consume data about the product? And that can help, especially if you open it up and ask people to tell you about their problems. They will tell you because they have so many problems with data, probably. So that can be a great way to begin to create those standards and those norms. I think the other thing that's really important, if you're the first product analyst and you're trying to like improve the way a company uses data, is starting small, right? Like not working really iteratively and not being like, okay, we're going to have this whole data governance program. It's going to be perfect. And we're going to roll it out all in once. And 10 weeks later, the data is going to be perfect. Really starting with like, okay, what do we track and why do we track it? And where is it available? And like help answer those, first key questions, and then build on it from there. I think sometimes it can be kind of daunting to feel like you have to fix everything all at once, especially if you're the first data hire or the first data person in a product team, and making sure that you're, starting with the biggest issues.
Yes, exactly. I think, and you're basically touching on, also what is. I think this is a similar thing that you've just described applies when you're not only the first product analyst, but when it has already started to scale, and you are trying to sort of align the teams. You talked a lot about that also, and on the podcast, and I know we share some beliefs on it and how to get data to think like product and vice versa. We talked a little bit about what it is to sort of integrate the data scientists into the product teams. And create that sort of cross-pollinated mindset. I loved your example about the happy accidents there. Mm-hmm. Is that, would you like to add anything to that? Like what are some ways you can set teams up for success with getting product managers more excited to use data science? And particularly maybe also because data scientists, especially when it's a few people, they get pulled into a lot of different directions. They're pulling together data for the board meeting. Mm-hmm. They are asked to advise about like recommendation models that might or might not get out in like the next 5 years or whatever. I mean, how do you set teams up for success with like that cross-pollination?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's important there. So one of the things that we do at Patreon is we do a bi-weekly business review with the product team, which is where we look at all of our product metrics across the kind of core areas of the product and the core teams every 2 weeks. And what's interesting is, first of all, starting those venues can be hard, especially if we weren't in that pattern before. We didn't really look at metrics on a bi-weekly basis. It was kind of like up to the data scientists to see if anything was broken. And then we do, like monthly reporting, but we didn't have that like cadence of let's look at it, every 2 weeks. And we had a product leader who came in and brought this practice to the organization, which has been really powerful for us. But one of the things about that is that you move from a world where it's just, okay, here's what this metric is doing, here's what that might mean, to really like, here's the opportunity we're seeing in the data. Like, here's what this metric or this gap in our conversion funnel or this trend tells us about what we could be building better in the product. And then when you have people in the room that are like bouncing ideas off each other, they're like, oh, cool. Like if we change that part of the funnel, it might change this other part of the product. Or like, oh, we shouldn't do that because here's what's going to happen downstream or whatever. And those sort of like collaborative, curiosity building, open discussion venues, I think are really important to get to a culture of using data collaboratively. I think the other thing that's really important there is like often questions will come up about like follow-up analysis. So like, hey, we see this metric trending in this direction. Can we understand what's happening in international markets or on mobile? And I think as a data science team or an analytics team, it's important to have like fast follow-ups for those questions and not just kind of like let them be tossed into the air and then never answered, because then that's teaching the organization that like, oh, we don't care about data or we don't care about answering those questions or, we don't have the capabilities. So that's something we try to do is like, if there are these big open data questions that come from that meeting, not spending the whole week on them, but at least prioritizing some fast follow-ups. Again, kind of building that muscle of, I have a hypothesis, here's what the data shows, let's dig in a little bit further.
Wow, I love this story. I have a bunch of follow-up meetings. No, follow-up meetings. Yes, we'll schedule a bunch of follow-up meetings about this. Questions, and it actually touches on another subject that I did want to bring up. So I'll revisit it then as well. But the first thing I think is really interesting to consider. You mentioned that this was a practice that was sparked by a new product leader. Did you say that?
Yep, absolutely.
And so when in the company journey did you start doing this, and how has it evolved? You know, like how big was the event to begin with? Who is facilitating it? Who speaks there? And how has that changed to where you are now?
Yeah, we started this, I think, about 2 years ago when one of our current directors of product, Matt Kay, joined the organization. And he was at Amazon, or previously at Amazon and at Trulia, and like brought some of those things. And this is, I think, a pretty well-known Amazon practice of like this kind of repetitive like metric meeting. And what's interesting is when we first did this, my first response was, hell yes, like let's look at metrics every 2 weeks. And then, of course, I had some nervousness because I was like, can we do it? Do we have the measurement? Do we have the capabilities? Like, do people understand the metrics? Is the data accurate? And so, the first really getting it off the ground, again, starting with that iterative approach, was like, let's start with the basics. Let's at least look at the metrics, look at the numbers, make sure everyone knows the definitions. I think what's really evolved is, I'd say 2 things. One is we've woven in our company goals to those metrics. So it's not just like, let's look at all the metrics across the business, because some of those metrics might not be what we're focusing on at a given point. And it's kind of, it can be useful, but it's often distracting if you're looking at a metric that you're not building product against, right? Because then you're like, well, we know this is going in the wrong direction, but we're not prioritizing it right now. So it kind of is just a bummer to talk about it every week. And obviously you should have some of that. You should know what's going on in the business. But the one was like weaving in the company goals. And then I think the second is really moving towards opportunities and lessons, instead of just this metric is $127,000 and last week it was $100,000. Instead saying like, what this trend tells us about the product is that we should invest more, or we should invest less in this area, or whatever. So I'd say those are the 2 biggest iterations we've had, is like weaving in team goals and then weaving in opportunities and lessons over just trends.
Oh my God, I love that you're sharing this. We just made a really similar switch at Alva. I mean, obviously we were super early, way more early than, 2 years ago. How big was Patreon?
We're probably about maybe 200 folks, 150. Yeah.
And now
we're like 300 something.
Yeah. So, okay. Twice. And then like, who joined that meeting then?
Yeah. So that also is, I think what's interesting is it's product managers. It's like all key product stakeholders. It's the data scientists on each of those product teams, and then designers and engineers as they want to, right? Like if you want to kind of be informed about the business and those trends, like you're in that meeting, and obviously having engineering leaders and design leaders there. But what's cool is we also have IC engineers who are there and IC designers. We also have product marketing in that meeting. We have some folks on the creator facing teams. So it's really like every 2 weeks, let's review what's happening in our data and our key metrics. And I think the other thing that's interesting there is like the collaboration between product and data is pretty important there. So like having the PM and the data scientists sync the day before and, look at these dashboards that we've already made and say, okay, there are, 10 things that our team is responsible for looking at in terms of the data. Which are the ones that we want to highlight in this venue? What are the things that we think will cause rich discussion and will help us understand the product better? So there's this really key collaboration there between the product manager and the data scientist, right? And the data scientist is responsible for making that data available, making sure it's accurate, making sure it's comprehensible. And then the product manager is really obviously the product owner of that area of the product, that area of the business.
Yeah, this is really great. And so do I understand that correctly, that sort of basically these are bi-weekly meetings that each team has, or are there multiple teams together in it?
Yeah, it's across the entire product org. Yeah, so
exactly.
all the product pods are in one meeting. Yeah, all the data scientists in one meeting.
That is awesome. So that's probably like, I don't know what, 40, 50 people or something?
Yeah, it's about 40 people.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Lex. Oh, that's the same as my face now. Can you bring it up again somehow? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we have this, we have exactly the same culture at Avo. We have it weekly. We have weekly metrics reviews, and we have sort of distributed ownership of OKRs and of North Star metrics. And so each OKR owner or each sort of metric presenter, which will be individual contributing developers, individual contributing product person, customer success person, community lead, just anyone on the team, will own different aspects. And they will have posted an update, written update previously. And the format is like, here's the update. This is what happened since last. And the focus is on, here's what I learned when I looked at the data. Here are the questions that like I had when I was looking at it. Here are the risks and mitigations that we might want to consider. And this always sparks questions. And then we have like follow-up discussions after everyone has presented theirs, where we sort of do deep dives of like, yeah, let's talk about that question. And like we prioritize the discussions. So I am really glad to hear that you have just migrated more into like a more structured, focused on like learnings type of discussion. Inspired, feeling it, right? Awesome. I want to maybe use this as a good sort of segue into another topic that I just pinged you about before that I want to add. We talked a lot about data literacy and data curiosity in the episode, and sort of how we can spark curiosity and maintain that culture of everyone looking at data. And obviously, this is a really good way of doing that, I think. So kudos to Matt to bring that onto the team, and kudos to you for facilitating and running it so amazingly. I've been getting a lot of questions lately, just personally, DMs and people reaching out to Avo about how to do that, how to create that journey in the company, how to build that go from 0 to 1, basically. And you shared some really great tips on what you've been doing. For example, I loved every new team member at Patreon gets a metrics onboarding, because that really gives them sort of an understanding of how do we measure the business success. And you also talked about calendar stalking, like figuring out what is currently going on in the organization that might, identify opportunities basically to plug in data folks or the data perspective into processes and conversations. What do you think, is one of the first thing a company should do to get started with this type of culture? Also, maybe particularly if we can assume that they haven't done it before, or they don't have the experience that Matt had, or they don't have your experience, like what could be a first good thing?
So one of the really important things here, I think, with data curiosity is kind of like breaking down the ivory tower of data science or AI. Like for a lot of people, for example, will come to Patreon and know we have a data science team, and then feel like that means that the team has to be like unapproachable, or that it's this research team that's in some other, part of the org that's never going to talk to anyone. I do think there is this kind of sometimes misperception that data science, it can feel very unapproachable for people. And so I think part of that initial like employee experience going from 0 to 1 is helping people understand that there's like an approachability spectrum, right? There's like, okay, I'm in Excel and I'm doing a pivot table, and every employee should feel comfortable doing that, to like, okay, I'm building a production deep learning model, right? And I try to help that approachability by honestly being friendly if people ask data questions, right? Like not saying, oh, how could you not know that? Or here's the link to the dashboard, it's right here, not having that kind of like toughness, but instead being like, what a great question. Or like, that's one of our most frequently asked questions. Here it is in the frequently asked question doc. So being friendly is like obviously a great place to start. I think the other thing, which we talked about a little bit in the episode, is really trying to understand where data might be useful in the organization. Because one of the things, if you're the first data hire or, on a really small team, you're not going to be able to help everyone in the organization with all the data they need, right? You're just like going to be under-resourced and not have the bandwidth. And so understanding and asking that question, where can we be the most impactful? Where are the decisions where data is going to help us identify problems we didn't see before, or help us understand things we didn't? And so that, really comes down to like prioritization of data within the organization. But a part of that is understanding what's going on across the org, which is maybe where like calendar stalking comes in, or talking to leadership and saying like, hey, what are all the initiatives that are going on? But then once you do that, figuring out where data can make the most sense and can plug in.
Yes, exactly. So this is like for when there is something in place. I've been getting a lot of people asking, just like, it's similar to when we were talking, just what we were talking about earlier. When you're the first product analyst, and we talked about it on like, how do you make an impact? But I've also been getting this question from like maybe CEOs of my, like, I don't know, 30 people companies, or an engineer at a 30 people company. There isn't a Maura that they can go to and that can be friendly. And I'm thinking, like, would you recommend throwing them into the deep pool of doing a metric review, like weekly or bi-weekly? Or would you recommend, like, I don't know, starting a Slack? We have a Slack channel at Avo. It's called Data and User Research, and like people post interesting things there. Any thoughts, anything that comes to mind there with like, how can you just create something of a forcing function?
Yeah, I don't think that throwing into a metric review is like the right place to start. For me, this comes down to curiosity about the business, and like, how do you create curiosity about the business, which at the end of the day is like curiosity about data. And I think that for that to spark in someone, there has to be some surprise or some like aha moment, right? Where someone's looking at a metric, or maybe not even metric, maybe they're just looking at user behavior and they're like, why is this happening? What's going on here? Right. And once they get that first answer, or they like make that first chart, or they like do that first analysis, I think that starts that journey of like, I have questions about the business, data can help answer those questions. And so maybe part of it is just starting with saying like, here are some hypotheses we have about user behavior, or here are some of the things, if you're the first product analyst, here's what I learned this week. What else do people want to learn? Like, what else are we curious about? Where else can data help us? And really starting from that place of like, what are the questions we're trying to answer, and see if you can get people excited about those questions. Because if you have people excited about building a product and adding value to customers, hopefully they have questions about like, how could they add more value, or how could they build a better product? And so creating that like virtuous cycle of the spark of curiosity, I think is the more foundational place to start than like, let's come into a metric review. Because if you come into a metric review and you don't have any questions, or you don't have any curiosities, like, it's going to be super boring. You're just going to look at a bunch of numbers and be like, okay, this is what the metrics tell us this week. So you got to have some of that discussion, that curiosity, those questions about the business.
I think that is spot on. I do think that looking at metrics sometimes creates that curiosity and creates some questions, but I think you're really spot on with this analysis. And I think an additional point to that is like, what that also sparks is people care about creating better data. They start realizing like, okay, I would like to be able to answer this question. What do I have to do to be able to do that? And that is really fundamental from my perspective of like, what has changed accessibility to data. It's when literally when individually contributing engineers start caring about data. That's a game changer for a company, I think.
Yeah, I think there's this idea, there's the example I love of this, of Patreon. On Patreon, we have lots of podcasters, we have lots of creators that make audio content. And until somewhat recently, we didn't track audio completion rate. So we couldn't say like, okay, 80% of your patrons finished listening to your podcast. And it took like one engineer implementing it on one of the apps, and then we got that data for one of our platforms, and then we like got it for more. And again, it takes that interest of like, I wonder how many people even listen to the stuff that's on Patreon. And it's like, hey, we can answer that with data if we instrument it correctly. But again, it takes that initiative of wanting to answer a question, knowing how to do it, and having the tools to do it. But then it can, again, kind of create this like wildfire effect, and other parts of the organization or of the code base or of the product get that same level of like thought about the kinds of questions that you want to answer.
I love it. Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I know we can talk about it for many years more. But I do want to maybe leave a few minutes on sort of Patreon challenges, what's next for you, and sort of maybe talk philosophically or sort of more in a more bird's eye overview of like what's going to happen in the space. So let's start off with, what's the next big challenge that you're planning to tackle at Patreon?
So there are so many. It's such an exciting time to be at a company that's working within the context of the creator economy. So 3 big things that we're doing. We're internationalizing, which is really exciting. We have creators in over 140 countries. And so we're adding more currencies and languages and localization and local payment methods, and trying to do that as quickly as possible so that, creators in Japan can get paid for their art and creators in Germany can get paid for their art in their local payment method and currency. We're focusing a lot on content and community and the patron experience around it. So if you're a patron, the act of consuming content on the mobile app should be seamless and beautiful and exciting. And you should feel the sense of like community from your creators. And then the third thing we're just starting to work on, which is very exciting and a big challenge from the data science side, is network and discovery. So beginning to introduce some elements of discovery on Patreon, which helps patrons find new creators, but doing that in a way that doesn't make us kingmakers, that doesn't make us like YouTube or like Facebook or Instagram, and that is thoughtful and creator first. And that's all really exciting from the data side because we're trying to do recommendations, but in a new and kind of Patreon-y way. So those are some of the big challenges and some of the things that we're really excited about.
That sounds really amazing and sounds like you have a big job ahead. I'm assuming you're hiring.
We are hiring, yes. Product folks, designers, data scientists. We have a ton of open roles. And yeah, if anyone watching wants to work at Patreon, please reach out. I'd love to be in touch.
Amazing. I at least can put my very heavy colon on. Probably it would be very inspiring to work with Maura and the team. I've known Maura now for, what is it now, Maura? 2 years?
2 years.
Yeah, and it's always been a dream. It's a really inspiring data team. The product folks are also really inspiring. The engineering folks, Jake and everyone there, also in the data team, are just, it's a fantastic team. So would recommend to a friend.
Thanks, Steph.
Maybe before sort of moving on to your personal, like, I would love to hear a little bit more about like just what's going on with you. But what are some of the interesting trends that you're sort of keeping an eye on in the space now?
In the data space or the creator space or both?
I was thinking about the data space. Yeah, let's stick to the data space for now.
Great. So I'm really interested in what's going on with data observability and reliability. I mentioned this on the podcast, but I'm like a huge data reliability nerd. And I care a lot about data trust and like data fidelity. And there's so many tools there now, and those tools are starting to integrate to other tools, which is really exciting. And obviously Avo is kind of one part of that, but I would say is really one part of this like larger universe of how do we understand and trust our data. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm pretty interested in, especially for Patreon, who, we have, some might say we have an older data team, others might say we have a brand new data team, but our data team is about, 6 years old. And so I'm really interested as well in kind of the way that transforming data and aggregating data for use within the company is changing, right? With like, you see what's happening with dbt blowing up, and tools to kind of create metrics repos. That's also like a big trend I'm super interested in. And then as always, I'm very interested in data ethics and the governance of data. I think especially we think about this a lot at Patreon with our machine learning efforts, is like, how do we create data products that are equitable and fair and ethical? And are we asking the right questions there to make sure we're doing that well? So those are probably my big 3 that I'm excited about right now.
That's awesome. That's a good list. That's a good list to watch out. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And what's next for you personally? What's next for Maura Church?
For me, we're just working super hard for the next few months. I mean, for the next few years, but we're really in this exciting crunch time of Patreon. We raised $155 million, and now we get to use that to hire more people and build more awesome products. And so just trying to build the best data team that's going to make that possible. And as I mentioned, like, I'm super energized by being able to get back to the office, get back to working in person with a bunch of my teammates, get that collaboration. Patreon has a super cool office. We have like musical instruments and jam sessions and, a creative space for folks to work. And so being able to have that energy again is something that I'm super stoked about.
Yes, that's a really nice byproduct of working on a creator company with a very passionate creator CEO. Like, you have a band in the office. It's a really nice, yeah. But what does the lockdown sort of the restrictions are now getting, I guess, more relaxed. We're opening things up. What does that mean for cool gray morning?
Oh my God. Thanks for that question, Steph. I have a side project this morning of doing 200 mornings in San Francisco. I've been a little behind because I'm living in a few different places across the bay at the moment. But what it means is that I'll be able to do some in-person workout classes, maybe some morning in-person coffees and breakfast. There's a lot there. So more to come.
Not more to come of Maura.
More to come of mornings.
More mornings. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Maura, everything and your knowledge and taking the time to chat with me. I always learn from it. And also, hopefully some of the people who are watching now or later will learn a bunch from this. So thank you.
Of course. It's been such a pleasure. And yeah, love chatting with you, Steph, about data. I know we could do it for a full day. So next time we'll do the 24-hour live stream version.
That's such a good idea. All right. Lex, how do we say goodbye here? Do we just say bye?
I think we just say bye.
Okay. Love it. Okay. Thank you so much, Maura. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Steph. Bye.
Bye.